Essentially, I think my question was more around this concept of noblesse oblige, which is essentially how the relationship that elites, at least in theory, had with their subjects, with their client classes in years past. And there was a bit more of a disintermediated way. If the elites would piss off their client class for a very long time, they would revolt and change the elite in a very direct way. I feel like the current moment has these multiple layers of obfuscations of who is actually in charge, who's actually doing things, and maybe no one is actually in charge, because that's essentially the kind of this emergent managerialism where that because no one is in charge, that's why we can't build the new bridge, or why it takes 15 years to build it, because it's the machine needs to churn it out through all of these pieces. So what's the relationship? So what's the how will these, how, in your vision, how will the elites of the future, what you're building towards, relate to their client classes in a way, without this direct mechanism? Because I don't know if we're still within the framework of democracy, if we're still have to build alongside the managerial behemoth. Is there any way to incentivize these people without any skin in the game, without their own?
So I think, again, like noblesse oblige, skin in the game, the feedback mechanism, this actually all comes down again to this question of elite ideology, because even in a democracy, the elite can in fact just stagnate for decades and decades, and face essentially no accountability for that. This is just the way, I don't know, the way things actually work in reality is that when you become powerful, you can use that power to entrench yourself, and it can be essentially impossible to dislodge you. And no amount of democracy is going to change that. And I think some people like to deny that, but that is, I think, what we're seeing is that we have a very entrenched, I won't call them even an elite, it's like an upper middle class, but we have a very entrenched regime, a very entrenched system and paradigm. And there's very little that can be done democratically to change this, largely because it's not like the people's opinions are this like exogenous force to the system. They're part of the system. They're shaped by the system. They're organized by the system. So the system has simply set itself up in a manner that shapes those opinions and organizes those efforts into further perpetuation of the system. So like this is sort of the critique of kind of populist electoral politics right now, is like, oh, well, that's great, you can elect some people, but you're just electing people that like the system knows how to digest. You're organizing in ways that the system knows how to digest. So yeah, the basic background fact, elites are not accountable to their subjects. It doesn't really work. Who they are accountable to is God. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, if they in fact just sit there and stagnate, they will eventually be wiped out, because they will fail to have prepared for real exogenous forces. They will fail to be coherent among themselves, and keep their thing unified. They will decay to the point where they are no longer able to control their subjects, and their subjects can become warlords and parallel elites and whatever might happen. Or they might be conquered from outside. That this is like this very, very visceral sort of way that this could happen. But even if there is no outside, you still have this problem. You still are basically subject to, if you don't do the work of being a virtuous elite, eventually you get destroyed. And this is just like basic facts of natural law, essentially. All organisms are subject to this. If you don't work, you don't eat. And the way an elite works is they govern their system well, and the way they eat is they get to accomplish that growth of their whole system. So really it comes down to, do the elites of a system have that vision to do something with their base of power, with their clients, their subjects, their empire? do they have something they want to do with it? And do they do the work? Do they have the discipline? Do they organize themselves to actually do that work? If yes, they're probably going to be fine because they are actively sort of striving against reality. They are actually out there doing their thing. Um, and and that's where life comes from. That's where health comes from. But, if they become more focused on, I just want to retire on my yacht. I just want to protect my secrets. I want to keep going to Epstein's Island and not face any accountability for this. Well, you're not really doing your job, and eventually God's going to fire you. So, but I think the key thing is where is the actual accountability mechanism? The actual accountability mechanism comes from reality, not the subjects. And I think this is maybe one of the toxic ideas of democracy, is that it convinces the elites that they're at war with their subjects. Rather than their subjects being assets, they become liabilities. And it's like, oh, the subjects are going to be disobedient. The subjects are going to vote us out. We have to brainwash the subjects. We have to control the subjects. The subjects are what we have to be worried about, right? Whereas no, actually, whether you're doing civilization is what you have to be worried about. So again, it's really just comes down to do you have this outlook or that outlook? This is not I think incentives can only be constructed within an outlook. It's only once you have the sense of what you care about that thing can be threatened, and that you can respond to that threat. So, but really, the question for elites is what do you care about? What is the worldview that you're operating on? And I think in this case, as far as accountability, you have to realize that your accountability is to reality, not to your subjects. The subjects are assets that you are working together with and organizing and leading towards the, whatever glorious vision you have. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any real glorious visions right now as a society.
That's my next question. It sounds like you're on a religious mission.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about that. But you also asked this question of is there even anyone in charge? I think the answer is no. I think they're basically, you can sort of see the outlines of something like a regime, but it kind of doesn't work anymore. It's failing. And I think this is something that, I especially see among kind of so-called dissident scenes. People are always oh, they're so powerful. How are we ever going to do anything? Our all we can do is complain about being oppressed. And this is kind of what goes on in the conservative world and so on. It's just people complaining about being oppressed. And it's okay, whatever, man. The actual reality is you're going to win by default if you are even trying. And the only question is, can you do the work well enough that when you win by default, you're actually able to do something with it? The system is, as it currently stands, is failing. The order is fading, right? It's becoming more insane. And that insanity is death, right? Insanity for a regime is death. So it's it's lashing out harder. No, it's not getting stronger. It's dying. So you have to see things, I think, from this perspective of okay, our job is not to be opposed to the system. The longer the system lasts, honestly, the better, because it's actually still holding back the tide of chaos, so to speak, and giving us time to work. What we need to be thinking about is, okay, how do we build a coherent elite? How do we build the next generation of elites who are going to be inheriting and stewarding this system? And this civilization. And so I think that's the productive way to think about it. And it's no, there isn't really anyone in charge right now. The WASP elite basically failed. Nothing really replaced them. And there's sort of these various conspiracies and various little interest groups and so on that have their systems of patronage within the system, but no one's really in charge. And to your point, that is the source of a lot of the dysfunction. It's actually just no one's in charge. No one's able to act above the institutions and shape the institutions. They're able to evade the logic of the institutions where it suits them, but they're not. That's because no one is enforcing the institutions, not because they are in fact elevated